The battle that decided the fate of the Pacific. Date: June 4th to 7th, 1942. Location: Midway Atoll, at the heart of the Pacific Ocean. Belligerents: Imperial Japanese Navy versus the United States Navy. Outcome: American victory, the end of Japan's expansion in the Pacific, and a decisive turning point in World War II. Midway. On the map, it was nothing more than a tiny cluster of coral islands. Yet in June 1942, this speck of land became the very center of world history. This battle was the reckoning for Pearl Harbor. Japan sought to transform the Pacific into an imperial lake. Having struck the United States at Pearl Harbor, they believed America subdued, and the myth of an invincible fleet carried them forward. But at Midway, that myth would shatter. For the United States, Midway was not merely a defensive outpost. This was a fight to seize control of the Pacific, to halt Japan's momentum, and to reshape the destiny of the free world. On the morning of June 4th, two great powers clashed across the blue expanse of the Pacific, forever altering the course of history. And within a matter of days, Japan's proud carriers would lie at the bottom of the ocean, while America would begin its rise to global superpower status. Preparation phase: Japanese front. Strategic objective: absolute dominance in the Pacific. After the success at Pearl Harbor, Japan expanded rapidly, establishing an imperial arc stretching from the Philippines to Malaya. Yet the true goal was greater: force the United States to the negotiating table and turn the Pacific into Japan's own lake. Midway Atoll, though a tiny speck of land, was the key to Hawaii. If Japan could seize it, Hawaii would fall under direct threat, and America's resistance in the Pacific would be broken. Planning: Operation MI. Code name: Operation MI. Architect: Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a Harvard-educated strategist who knew the West well. He believed the United States, still reeling from Pearl Harbor, would collapse before it could recover. Objective: lure out America's aircraft carriers and annihilate the Pacific Fleet in a single stroke. Forces: 4 aircraft carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, 2 battleships, 248 aircraft, thousands of sailors, soldiers, and support vessels. Japan once again trusted in its overwhelming superiority to deliver a decisive blow. American front. Defense status: the power of code-breaking. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, America seemed weakened, but behind the scenes, it possessed a secret weapon: intelligence. The magic and purple code-breaking programs had cracked Japanese diplomatic and military communications. Through them, U.S. intelligence learned that Japan's true target was Midway. This single discovery would reshape the coming battle. Forces: a risky ambush. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz chose not to wait passively, but to take a monumental risk. He hid America's carriers in a concealed ambush, ready to strike the Japanese fleet. 3 carriers: USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, USS Yorktown. 360 aircraft-strong submarine support, Midway's air base, joining the defense outcome. The United States entered the battle not with numerical superiority, but with information superiority. Midway was no longer just an atoll. It became a chessboard where the fate of 2 empires would be decided. The course of the battle. June 4th, 1942. First clash: the bombing of Midway. At dawn, Japanese aircraft swooped down on Midway Atoll, unleashing a heavy bombardment. Objective: destroy airstrips, fuel depots, and defensive positions. The American air base on Midway took severe damage, but was not silenced completely. Meanwhile, torpedo bombers launched from U.S. carriers charged toward the Japanese fleet. This first assault turned into disaster. Japanese fighters cut most of them down in midair. The U.S. suffered heavy losses, but gained something priceless: the exact position of the Japanese fleet. June 4th, Midday, the turning point. As the hours passed, American dive bombers, Douglas SBD Dauntless, emerged from the clouds and spotted the Japanese carriers. Their sudden attack changed the fate of the battle. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were struck within minutes. Flight decks burst into flames. Munitions detonated. Japan's carrier strike force, the very heart of its navy, was crippled in a single afternoon. From this moment, the myth of Japan's invincible fleet began to collapse. June 5th to 6th, 1942. Hiryu's last stand. The sole surviving carrier, Hiryu, struck back fiercely. The USS Yorktown was hit hard, damaged, and eventually sunk shortly after a torpedo strike the next day. But Hiryu's fate was sealed as well. On June 5th, American dive bombers struck her decks. The explosions in her magazine ignited massive fires. Hiryu sank in flames. By the end, Japan had lost all 4 of its carriers. June 7th, 1942. The aftermath, a turning point in the Pacific. After 3 days of brutal combat, the Japanese fleet was forced to retreat. Japan's offensive power was shattered. For the United States, the trauma of Pearl Harbor was avenged, with its first major victory in the Pacific. Midway was no longer just a small atoll. It became the place where the fate of the Pacific was rewritten. Losses and statistical assessment. U.S. losses. 1 aircraft carrier sunk. USS Yorktown, hastily repaired after Pearl Harbor. It fought valiantly at Midway, but was ultimately lost to torpedo attacks. 307 sailors killed. Several destroyers and support vessels sustained damage. While these losses seemed significant, the fact that the U.S. had sacrificed only 1 carrier while achieving such a decisive victory underscored the scale of the triumph. Japanese losses. 4 aircraft carriers destroyed: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These were Japan's elite strike carriers, the very same ships that had spearheaded the Pearl Harbor attack. Over 250 aircraft annihilated. With them, Japan lost not only machines, but also highly trained pilots, a blow that shattered its naval air power. More than 3,000 sailors killed. This was more than a statistic. It represented the loss of an entire generation of experienced seamen. Overall assessment. The U.S. lost a single carrier, but dealt Japan a crippling blow by sinking 4. This disparity was not merely tactical. It permanently shifted the strategic balance in the Pacific. After Midway, Japan was forced into a defensive posture. The legend of the invincible fleet sank beneath the waters of the Pacific. Strategic and psychological impacts. Strategic outcomes. Japan's expansionist ambitions came to an abrupt end. After the rapid advance across the Pacific following Pearl Harbor, Japan was forced for the first time to retreat. The defeat at Midway nullified Tokyo's plans for further offensives in the Asia-Pacific. The initiative now belonged to the United States. Until Midway, America had largely fought a defensive war. After Midway, that dynamic shifted. The U.S. became the attacker, while Japan was forced onto the defensive. America's strategic dominance solidified. The victory at Midway paved the way for the Allies' first major counteroffensives in the Pacific, such as the Guadalcanal campaign. It also confirmed a decisive truth. Aircraft carriers had become the backbone of modern naval warfare, replacing the battleship as the ultimate weapon of sea power. Psychological impacts. The myth of the invincible fleet was shattered. The loss of 4 carriers not only crippled Japan's military strength, but also destroyed its aura of psychological superiority. This blow triggered a deep sense of demoralization within the Japanese armed forces. For the American people, Midway was the revenge for Pearl Harbor. The victory reversed the trauma inflicted on December 7, 1941. Instead of fearing an unstoppable Japan, the U.S. public now believed in a future that could be reclaimed. For the Allies, Midway was a turning point of morale. Confidence that had been lacking until then returned in force. To nations locked in battle against Nazi Germany in Europe, Midway stood as clear proof. Japan could be beaten. The fate of the Pacific at Midway, a tiny atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Yet on the scales of history, it toppled the weight of an empire. Here, it was not only steel warships that sank. A legend collapsed, Japan's invincible navy. And at the same moment, a power rose, the United States of America. With this victory, Japan's advance was halted. America's counteroffensive began. The fate of the Pacific was rewritten. Midway entered history not merely as a naval battle, but as the turning point of an entire era. Because the giant awakened at Pearl Harbor stood fully tall at Midway. Today, historians often sum up Midway in a single sentence. At Pearl Harbor, the giant awoke. At Midway, it stood up.